when in the cold small hours before dawn, as even Claudia slept, weary of her books and the meager fare that caution allowed her vampire hunger, I lowered a lantern down through the rising vapor until the fire blazed right over the lapping waters, and nothing came to light on that heaving surface but the light itself, the reflection of that beam traveling constant with me, a steady eye, which seemed to fix on me from the depths and say, "Lewis, your quest is for darkness only. This sea is not your sea. The myths of men are not your myths. Men's treasures are not yours." But oh, how the quest for the old world vampires filled me with bitterness in those moments. A bitterness I could all but taste, as if the very air had lost its freshness. For what secrets, what truths had those monstrous creatures of night to give us? What of necessity must be their terrible limits, if indeed we were to find them at all? What can the damned really say to the damned? I never stepped ashore at Piraeus. Yet in my mind I roamed the Acropolis at Athens, watching the moon rise through the open roof of the Parthenon, measuring my height by the grandeur of those columns, walking the streets of those Greeks who died at Marathon, listening to the sound of wind in the ancient olives. These were the monuments of men who could not die, not the stones of the living dead. Here the secrets that had endured the passage of time, which I had only dimly begun to understand. And yet nothing turned me from our quest. And nothing could turn me. But over and over, committed as I was, I pondered the great risk of our questions. The risk of any question that is truthfully asked. For the answer must carry an incalculable price, a tragic danger. Who knew that better than I, who had presided over the death of my own body, seeing all I called human wither and die, only to form an unbreakable chain which held me fast to this world, yet made me forever its exile, a specter with a beating heart. The sea lulled me to bad dreams, to sharp remembrances. A winter night in New Orleans, when I wandered through the St. Louis cemetery and saw my sister, old and bent, a bouquet of white roses in her arms, thorns carefully bound in an old parchment. Her gray head bowed, her steps carrying her steadily along through the perilous dark to the grave where the stone of her brother Louis was set side by side with that of his younger brother. Louis, who had died in the fire of Pointe du Lac, leaving a generous legacy to a godchild and namesake she never knew. Those flowers were for Louis, as if it had not been half a century since his death, as if her memory, like Louis's memory, left her no peace. Sorrow sharpened her ashen beauty, sorrow bent her narrow back. And what I would not have given as I watched her, to touch her silver hair, to whisper love to her, if love would not have loosed on her remaining years a horror worse than grief. I left her with grief, over and over and over. And I dreamed now too much. I dreamed too long in the prison of this ship, in the prison of my body, attuned as it was to the rise of every sun as no mortal body had ever been. And my heart beat faster for the mountains of Eastern Europe. Finally beat faster for the one hope that somewhere we might find in that primitive countryside the answer to why under God this suffering was allowed to exist. Why under God it was allowed to begin, and how under God it might be ended. I had not the courage to end it, I knew without that answer. And in time the waters of the Mediterranean became, in fact, the waters of the Black Sea. vampire sighed. The boy was resting on his elbow, his face cradled in his right palm, and his avid expression was incongruous with the redness of his eyes. "Do you think I'm playing with you?" the vampire asked, his fine, dark eyebrows knitted for an instant. "No," the boy said quickly. "I know better than to ask you any more questions. You'll tell me everything in your own time." And his mouth settled, and he looked at the vampire as though he were ready for him to begin again. There was a sound then from far off. It came from somewhere in the old Victorian building around them, the first such sound they'd heard. The boy looked up towards the hallway door. It was as if he'd forgotten the building existed. Someone walked heavily on the old boards. But the vampire was undisturbed. He looked away as if he were again disengaging himself from the present. That village. I can't tell you the name of it. The name's gone. I remember it was miles from the coast, however. And we'd been traveling alone by carriage. And such a carriage. It was Claudia's doing that carriage, and I should have expected it. But then things are always taking me unawares. From the first moment we arrived in Varna, I had perceived certain changes in her, which made me at once aware she was Lestat's daughter as well as my own. From me she had learned the value of money, but from Lestat she had inherited a passion for spending it. And she wasn't to leave without the most luxurious black coach we could manage, outfitted with leather seats that might have accommodated a band of travelers, let alone a man and a child who used the magnificent compartment only for the transportation of an ornately carved oak chest. To the back were strapped 2 trunks of the finest clothes the shops there could provide. And we went speeding along, those light, enormous wheels and fine springs carrying that bulk with a frightening ease over the mountain roads. There was a thrill to that when there was nothing else in this strange country. Those horses at a gallop and the gentle listing of that carriage. And it was